All right, Mekone turned 77. More of the same in terms of our summoning. We are bringing in another Lamia Queen. We actually discovered somebody trying to use astral projection. And this is what happens if you try to use that spell and the enemy has an astral mage in the same province. Not sure if it's 100%, but it's pretty likely from my understanding. Don't really like using that spell for this reason, but if you're up against people that don't have astral, then you don't have to worry about it as much. Mekone normally doesn't have a lot of astral, but of course we have the lizard shamans. And then speaking of astral shenanigans, we actually had a successful mind hunt, so that's nice. I believe this was an Eagle King, so that was extra nice. And then we have our battles, starting with an assassination. This is the same guy who's been running around and getting seraphs. And this is fairly expensive kitting for an assassin. You probably could just get away with the bottle of living water. Not sure if the rest of this is really necessary. Hasn't really been so far. But nonetheless, it is working out, and that's nice. Otherwise, no very interesting battles this time. Our ghouls march on against relatively light PD, and then we turn around. This is actually this area seraph must not have any gems, I'm thinking. A water gem. So I'm assuming like a lesser water elemental? Maybe, eventually. Nope. Is he gonna use them? Interesting. Maybe not scripted to use the gem, and this isn't enough to trigger gem usage, just via the AI. But yeah, anyway, the wolf tribe do the trick. It is a little dangerous here, but I think we actually, get the HP route, or possibly he just fails a morale check. But yeah, a little surprising that worked. But this is 15 PD, so somewhat heavy investment. And then, we bounce a scout off of Calum. No patrolling again, so looks like probably no patrolling. You have to be careful about that, but at least so far there hasn't been any patrolling. And then our army, marches on against minimal PD. This is the Throne Province. And then our Peltasts take, province against light PD. And then our Peltasts were beaten. I was about to say one. It looked very similar to this report, but in this case we lose to probably about 10 PD of Deer Tribe. And this definitely, take a quick look at this. This probably could have gone either way, and we're not getting helped by the storm. Although we end up going against, Deer Tribe also have javelins, so it's maybe a bit of a wash in terms of the storm, I think. But the main problem here is that, the Helit troops, they have abysmal morale, and since we're using just a regular commander to lead them, right, there's no taskmaster bonus. You can see this is fairly close. This could have worked, but yeah, we just end up failing a morale check. It's not surprising. I don't know if there's a cheap way to get commanders, at least for Mekone. There isn't really a cheap way to get commanders with Taskmaster, at least that I know of. So if you're gonna do this sort of Peltas raiding, you kind of just need to accept that you're gonna lose some of these groups to routes. And if you're up against Peltasts, I don't know, maybe spamming Panic or Terror, actually, not too bad if you have some cheap mages you can sprinkle around. Because I don't think they would do so hot against that. So anyway, this raid doesn't work out for us. And then we have a Cyclops. This is the group that we mind hunted the commander, right? So, we're able to knock this out. We, again, don't get too many kills, but, some of these guys are going to die in the retreat, and this group isn't really, useful anymore, both because the commander was taken out, and then, we've scattered the troops, and then, on to events. Maybe demons, probably not. People refusing to pay taxes. Yeah, probably, a little bit concerned about all these demons. Someone desecrated our temple. Not cool. We got some blood slaves, that is nice. And then, three-headed calves, of course. Barbarians, always. Losing a little bit of gold, and then getting some gems. Quite a few gems, actually. 11 gems, so this is very nice. And then here are those barbarians. These are actually, should have been Calum's barbarians, but sadly our ghouls get taken out here. They raided this province, and then, they got caught by the barbarians that were coming in. And then, of course, on to our Bane Venom charms and, all the rest of this stuff. So let's see what we're up to. So this is the situation and, what we're doing about it. Before I dive into some of the details, I probably should mention that this is it. This was actually the official end of the game, which a bit abrupt, definitely. I think, kind of for everybody. we were definitely getting close to the end of the game, but I think, people just asked to see some score graphs. There was a bit of waning interest, I think, on the parts of, some of the players, and looking at the graphs, like it was pretty clear to everyone. Let's see, we still have, research and gem income, which we've talked about before, is that, it's kind of an underwater like showdown here. It's Atlantis and Therados that are the game leaders. And I mean, at this point, like it really could go either way, I think. You certainly can't tell from like these graphs alone, especially because Therados was voted as the winner. Even though Atlantis was, actually leading in at least the graphs that I'm aware of. I'll try to dig up some of the other graphs that were posted. And Therados was leading in things like army size, which is not that surprising because they get free spawn. But basically, it sounded like, Atlantis didn't feel confident in their ability to defeat Therados and, was feeling a bit overwhelmed. It was their first time playing in the late game, and, like, I totally understand being overwhelmed, especially because, like, I mean, you can see, like, where are we at? Like, it's somewhat overwhelming to play my position, and, like, he's, like, triple, quadruple like my size or whatever. Lord only knows. So, his late game task is even much more massive than mine. So he didn't really want to play it out and challenge Therados, and the rest of the room agreed that, like, nobody else could realistically like challenge Therados. So they were voted as the winner. But fear not, we will actually get a few more turns. And thank you to the Ermor player who suggested this, and I should have thought of it because I was like, ooh, this is going to be a bit of a rough end of this series. But the Ermor player suggested, well, like, whoever wants to stay in, and play like a few more turns, like, let's just do that, and everybody else can set themselves to AI. So we are going to get a few more turns. This is, Calum does not take any more turns. If I were on better terms with the player, I probably would have hit him up and asked him to play out at least a cap assault or something like that, to make for a good finale. But not on particularly great terms. They don't set themselves to AI, so they just stale pretty much from here on out. But diving back into what is going on this turn, they did actually gateway back, kind of as I was expecting. I was thinking they might try to gateway in to save this fort, but they chose to gateway. I'm assuming it's gateway. I don't know how else. I guess they have been making some corpse constructs here. But their god is here, so definitely there was some sort of teleporting, probably a gateway, I would imagine. But there are other ways to move around magically. So anyway, they have like a major stack here in their capital. They didn't bring everything down. It looks like they moved out with some of their corpse constructs and a few other random things. So yeah, obviously I'm going to be playing a bit more aggressively than I normally would, considering the situation. So in that vein, we're just going to take our main army and immediately jump on top of the capital here. We're not going to wait. Probably wouldn't have done this, had the player like still been around and playing. I don't know, hard to say. Like, could have gone either way, but this is definitely a bit risky, and like we don't really need to rush. And it'd be nice to at least combine with like some of the casters that are here on top of this fort. We probably don't need more chaff than this army has, but some more gigantes would be nice. And then also in that vein, rather than trying to set up a more efficient storming group, I'm just gonna storm with the full army, which don't really recommend, but with the amount of stuff that was in here, I felt that like our specialized storming group maybe couldn't handle what was in there, in which case we'd have to like break stuff off, and we haven't actually seen this army like fight in actual battle, so I figured, hey, what the heck, let's actually get it in there and have it fight a battle. We're also storming here, which I probably would have stormed. I think this is like almost completely empty, and then we're just raiding forward with more or less whatever we have. I think this is a Elder Cyclops, and this is probably also an Elder Cyclops. So just stepping up our rating and everything. Of note, I did actually shut off the Peltas wave, more or less. I think this is kind of the last little bit of it. Probably would have done this even if the game was continuing to go on legitimately, because what I realized is having a chain this long was actually starting to chew up like a significant amount of gold, right? We have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7, 8. We have like, I don't know, 8 or 9 like Peltas groups like in motion. And with the chain being this long, like they're not actually getting eliminated quickly enough. And then especially too, like it's just taking too long to actually get them to the front. So I stand by the Peltas wave. I will probably attempt this in a future game. Like I do think it's the right way to attack. I just think that the timing was off. I think if I'd done this like from the start, and then that way like the Peltas attack never ran out of steam, then I think it would have had value. But it is definitely something to consider. I hadn't really thought about the fact that it's like, well, with a chain this long, you're gonna have a significant amount of gold like tied up in these raiding groups that aren't actually doing anything for you yet. So I shut that off. But yeah, otherwise that covers turn 77. All right, Mekone turned 78. We flung a ton of our commanders and a bunch of Cloud Trapeze raid attacks. And it did not go as well as one might have hoped and as well as they've been going. And that is at least partially because I dispelled Perpetual Storm this turn. So I hadn't really talked about it, but we kind of built up a fairly substantial bank of Astral Pearls, which is kind of funny because I know at least Ermor had mentioned that, just in the game chat, they're like, yeah, like I have a really terrible Astral income this game. And I think just, the random distribution of sites, we ended up with, quite a few Astral sites apparently, because we have pretty good Astral income, which, is weird for Mekone. And like it's kind of hard for us to take advantage of. Now with the sorceresses, we have better access to Astral, but I was planning on doing this at some point. But fighting under Perpetual Storm hasn't been great for us, right? It makes Kalem's air elementals better, and then in battles he doesn't need to worry about casting storms, so it saves him time and gems, and it's just kind of useful in battle for like air nations. So there was definitely always an argument for like trying to dispel it as early as possible. And I don't know, it seems I don't really see too many dispels in my games or like in games that I've watched, and it's probably something I'm going to try to get into more, because I think it seems like it's an underused mechanic. It's a gamble, of course, right? You never know like how many gems the other person put in, so whether or not you could be wasting gems, but people definitely try to overcast globals, and that's essentially the same gamble. There is something to be said for when you dispel something, especially in a free-for-all setting like this, it doesn't really benefit, it doesn't give you an advantage, right? So you're spending a lot of resources to remove an advantage, but you don't really get anything in return, even if it's successful. But that said, I mean, some globals are pretty critical to dispel. So anyway, don't see a ton of dispelling, and I figured that Kalem would probably just put it back up. If I did dispel it, then we'd need like multiple dispels, although I'm kind of okay with that, because that would be air gems that he'd be putting into the global, instead of air elementals in my face. But I was thinking that it would probably be best to dispel it, especially if the war had been going on for a long time, right? He would just get used to the idea, like, okay, it's not going to get dispelled, right? Like, this is something I can count on. Why would the Mekone player like dispel it, 10 turns, 20 turns into the war? And then dispel it on a turn that, I was pretty sure we were going to have a critical battle, in the hopes that, he would rely on Perpetual Storm providing his storm and, mess up the scripting for a critical battle. So anyway, this is something that, I was planning on doing. This is like, we're making an assault, so I figured, what the hey, let's give it a shot. However, it does cause some problems, because I had gotten used to it as well, and so we do some air elemental raiding here, and I at least remembered to put enough gems, because they can't summon storm power anymore. But I think, are there some birds? Yeah. So there's just anywhere that there's birds scattered around, basically. This air elemental rating goes significantly less well, especially like for our human commanders, right? So I think this is another one, and this is one of our Gigantes, but no gear or anything. I think this, he's been shrunk a little bit, so he's not quite as tough as normal. And this isn't even birds, it's just Zots, right? So it's just flying PD, And like, yeah, they just come in and like lance strikes, do they even get lances? No. They just beat them down with their stone club swords. So we get some wins, definitely. Like, I think this one works out for us. Yeah, because, actually, maybe not. Because in a lot of places, like, Calum just has, like, birds that have retreated from other battles. Okay, yeah, here we get an iron skin off. Okay, yeah, and we have some armor. So, like a little bit of gear for your raiders, like especially more expensive raiders like this. Did we actually get an air elemental out? No, we did not. So, yeah, this is just purely like giants or like decent raiders, with a little bit of kitting. Oop, we actually run away. So, nope, doesn't quite work out for us. So you can see like this is not going too well. Let's see. A lot of cave battles this time. Yeah, I think this one hopefully works out. Yeah, another one where there aren't really too many birds. And I'm not sure if they can fly in caves. Well, I guess the air elemental can fly. So that one works out for us. And then otherwise kind of more the same. So we have our ghouls moving out. They take out some PD, and then here we have a Cyclops. This is jumping on top of Calum's capital, but there's no patrolling, right? So he can handle like bird PD. We've seen these guys take out like more than that. This is a case where a human air elemental raider actually works out because there's no birds in the PD. This is still kind of risky. Like probably wouldn't do this if it wasn't like this sort of situation. Wouldn't really recommend this because it's a little too risky in my opinion. But it works out for us here. Another place where it works out for us, some more air elemental raids. And then this is Arcocephali's army just moving out, taking out minimal PD, and then here's our Cyclops taking basically an undefended province, and then our Peltas raiding out, taking just light PD. And then probably our last combined Shaman Elder Cyclops group, again demonstrating that this probably wasn't my greatest plan. It's a very high attrition, so we lose a Shaman here, but we do at least take this province. And then we have the main assault. So this is sort of our secondary army assaulting that fort. And there's quite a bit in here. Like most of it is kind of garbage. The corpse constructs, some birds, definitely some casters. There's like 2 kitted Eagle Kings in here, somewhat kitted anyway. And quite a few area seraphs it looks like. Yeah, but no gems really. Actually, a lot of these are Seraphines who are a lot less scary. Yeah, I personally think that he over-recruited these Seraphines, but I don't really play Calum, so I could very well be wrong on that. And then he's actually got a decent contingent of Blizzard Warriors in here, right, with their frost bows. Could be kind of nasty. So he's got a bunch of Blood Slaves back here. He's blood-empowered and area Seraphine, it looks like. I don't think they normally, they don't get blood normally. So that's kind of interesting. Not sure what his plans were there. And then, these guys are probably the ones who've been making the corpse constructs. Obviously, this is, semi-unscripted from Calum. You can see the summoned storm powers going down, but of course there isn't actually a storm anymore. Perpetual storm is, finally gone. We're just sending in the human hoplites first. See, I think there's some fire resistance, or maybe cold resistance. He does actually have some of these mammoths, which I think is a good call. Like, they're going to be pretty good against our human troops. We're like great tramplers. They're not going to be so great against, our gigantes, who are going to kill them pretty fast. They can still technically trample them, but it's just a lot less effective. We have Will of the Fates down. We also brought in, quite a few of our summons here. Probably should have, it's hard to say, you want your summon troops to bear the brunt of the fighting, and that is not what is going to happen here. On the other hand, if you have this, you need the summoners pretty far forward to actually get it so that the summon troops do the majority of the fighting, which means it's a decent chance you're going to lose those mages, possibly before, they manage to get any summoning. Looks like he's summoning imps, yeah. So it's definitely a solid use of Blood 1, pretty standard. And then we've got at least one of our polo marks on advance. We have a few casters on advance and cast spells, doing our normal fire stuff. Some blade winds. There's a phantasmal army. yeah, Flame Eruption, really good spell. We do get clogged in the gate here, unfortunately. You know, you had a decent setup with the mammoths coming out and messing up like our human Helit hoplites. And like the Helit hoplites are pretty slow anyway, so they're actually like not a great choice for trying to clog the gate. I should probably, turn on team colored squares here, because a lot of these imps are our imps, right? Because we have our fellows with the lifelong protections. And the lifelong protections are quite useful, I think, in a siege situation, since imps can fly. So you know, you don't get to control where they go, but you know, they may choose to mess with the back line. And we have knocked out, you know, a ton of the archers here. Although I'm sure some of that is from the casting. And then did we get off? I think we got off a protection spell. Oh, it's hard to say. That's a summon guy. Let's see. No, looks like we didn't. So I'm not sure what happened there. We may have chose not to do mass protection because we knew we'd be doing, you know, like a lot of fire magic. So, you know, did we give ourselves... Yeah, we have cold resistance and shock resistance, so we did the army-wide cold and shock, which, yeah, both like good choices. Would have been nice if we could have worked, you know, fire resistance in there. There's a flame eruption from Kalem's side of things. Nice, Area Seraphine, who I was maligning earlier, getting some pretty nasty fire magic out. I think she probably had a gem to get herself up to fire 2 to make herself a little more useful. Definitely, you know, a good thing to do. So yeah, like somewhat painful, like not too bad. Again, you know, we're kind of up against a semi-unscripted army. Obviously, like some scripting had already gone into this, you know, before you stopped playing, but I'm sure, you know, it would have been adjusted, you know, for the actual assault. But, you know, that does work out for us. So, you know, you can use an army to take a castle. It's just going to hurt a little bit. Our losses are fairly high for the Helit hoplites, which is fine. They're a little slow to bring in, so it hurts a little bit in that sense, but like gold-wise, you know, not a big deal. So, you know, sacrificing them is fine. The Peltas losses, that's fine. Losing the 3 shamans does hurt. That's probably the most important thing. I'm not actually sure what happened there. So let's actually investigate what killed these shamans. It looks like it's actually some range stuff. So this guy got hit with a frostbow and then a fireball, probably before, you know, our luck got applied to the entire army, and he died. And then, yeah, this guy just got hit by a frostbow, and then, yeah, that definitely, like, messed up the communion a bit. That's also probably where our mass protection went. So, you know, we lost enough shamans that they weren't able to pull that off, or possibly this guy actually they were both communion slaves, it looks like. So they probably just lost enough of the boost so that they weren't able to pull off mass protection. And then the last guy that we lost was then excessive fatigue, you know, which makes sense. I don't like tightly work out, you know, my communions. I don't, you know, run the math or anything like that. It's just sort of a sense of roughly what you can get away with, but losing 2 communion slaves is definitely going to mess up, you know, a communion of this size. So we got unbalanced, and then we wiped out another one with fatigue. So that's what happened with the lizard shamans. But still, not a bad showing for this army. Although, yeah, we did have a few E4s retreat in a very cowardly fashion. Not sure what happened there. And then, yeah, this isn't too interesting. There was just one area seraph, and you know, they were not able to hold off our Polemarchs and Elder Cyclops, along with supporting Gigantes. And then, of course, plenty of events. We don't really need to go through them now. And we have breached the fort in Kalem, and that is pretty much the only thing like of note. So, you know, we're going to be storming with everything with the other army. The other thing that we're doing is, you know, trying to get vengeance for our other fully kitted or nearly fully kitted assassin. We just thrown a, you know, pretty similar kitting, you know, just giving him another weapon because why not? So he is going to get revenge against that Trog that wiped out our other assassin. And then, you know, just continuing to like throw a bunch of raiders forward to, you know, just see what sticks and, see what we can get away with. All right, Mekone turned 79. No reason to mess around. Let's take a look at the assault on Kalem. So this is our main army here. You know, we've kind of seen this before. You know, we just have the corpse constructs in the back. Maybe an argument to, you know, not bring them in at all. Like probably if still playing this game, I might have a commander sit outside because they're probably not going to do too much for us in the battle. But they can be kind of nice as just an HP anchor in the back. We have our long dead horsemen boxed up here, and they're just going to try to go in immediately through the gap. And then on Kalem's side, this is probably even less scripted than the last defense force, since this had just been gatewayed in when Kalem stopped taking turns. So it's probably whatever script was already on the mages. He does have quite a few mammoths here, which will be a problem for some of our smaller troops, and then just a good amount of birds and quite a few corpse constructs, a few of his summons, and then not a ton in terms of casters. It's just a pretty good sign. I feel like he has been losing a decent amount of casters in raiding. In fact, there's 2 Eagle Kings, it looks like, and they're fairly kitted in like the kind of normal. This guy's a little lighter on the kitting, and they do actually have gems on them, but again, it's probably just kind of whatever script that they had been using, possibly like raiding type scripts, so going to be a lot less effective than they actually would be. And then he does have his pretender here, and Astral 5 is definitely enough for a gateway, and she has 150 leadership, so probably was a gateway that brought a lot of these units back, and then just sort of like full kit, mostly defensive with quite a bit of reinvigoration as well, and quite a few gems. So let's see how this goes. Like I said, we're sending our long dead horsemen in immediately and taking some arrow fire. A little bit concerning, might lose some lizard shamans. And the long dead horsemen do not do great against mammoths. I wasn't expecting him to do brilliant, but I have to say I was pretty surprised at how badly they were crushed. One thing about them, this guy's almost dead, but they don't have a lot of health anyway, even when they have full health. And so I think just the trample damage takes them out really, really quickly. They are only size 3. The mammoths are size 6, right? Yeah. They do deal a decent amount of damage to the mammoths. The long dead horsemen are really kind of glass cannony. And then we've got our mass luck, our mass cold protection, and our mass shock resistance. It would be nice. I'm not sure why we don't have. What is going on here, guys? Their morale hasn't broken. Oh, they're going after some birds up here in the corner. That's rough. You can't really, give orders to the summons, so they go after whoever they go after. It looks like we have at least some routes. Our Helid Hoplites. There is Wailing Winds up, right, from Kalem's Pretender, and, I knew that was a possibility. I actually think Kalem is a nation that can do Wailing Winds with some wiggling, even without the help of their Pretender. And I think, Wailing Winds is just a really good spell anyway, but Mekone is a pretty good target for it, if they're using their, human Helid troops. And the Gigantes also, not fantastic morale. I even think, there's probably, some morale items running around somewhere, I would hope. Maybe not. But our Gigantes are hanging out, and, the summons, they do have morale. Okay, that's good to know. The corpse constructs don't, at least, so that's maybe an argument for bringing them in, although we did go with the mass protection, so that's good for the corpse constructs. It does mean that that's where our fire resistance has been going. So I was casting the army-wide fire resistance buff. It just it cancels out the fire weakness you get with the mass protection. I think that a little bit of air elemental summoning, probably off script. I think in an actual fight we would have seen a lot more air elementals, which would have been tough. These Blizzard Warriors I think are not fantastic in combat, and there really isn't a whole lot that's going to be better than our Gigantes, especially once they've been buffed, right? So they get the advantage of the mass protection and the luck, and so they're going to be really annoying and difficult to kill, and they're going to kill guys pretty effectively as well. So I think just our better troops, along with probably more caster support, maybe before before they all ran off thanks to Wailing Winds. So this actually ends up being somewhat close. I think had this been properly scripted, there would have been a very good chance I think it would be more likely than not we would have lost a fight like this. Though I probably would not have taken a fight exactly like this. So it does work out for us, and our casualties actually aren't terrible. Right, like we had a lot less left at the end there because of Wailing Winds, and that is one thing about Wailing Winds is that you drive your enemies away, but you don't actually kill them. So it does kind of have that downside. So we lose all the Long Dead Horsemen, which does hurt. That's a lot of gems, and they didn't really do much. 9 kills. So that was not the best use of Long Dead Horsemen. Probably not the right unit to throw through the gap. I mean, it depends on what you're up against. They're very fast, so in that sense, they're a great unit, to get through that gap quickly during assaults. But they don't have a lot of staying power. So, yeah, and then we lose some corpse constructs. 6 gigantes, it hurts a little bit, but yeah, this is actually pretty good, loss rate. And then of course, yeah, we take out quite a bit of stuff. So unscripted, but a decent pile of things. So that more or less covers the war against Calum. We had a few other raids here and there. None of it was particularly interesting. I would say the only other thing is to get vengeance against this troglodyte. Can a fully kitted Gigante assassin defeat this trog? I think the answer is clear. No, he cannot. Yeah, so this is just hilarious to watch every time. I had tested this. I didn't bother retesting this scenario because I already knew that there was absolutely no chance that he could lose to this trog. What I didn't test was if you give the trog a frostbrand and a copper plate that he had stolen from the previous failed assassination attempt. And yeah, it turns out, you give that to him. We got hit with I think we got hit with the shock as well, but he also just does a ton of damage with a frostbrand. So yeah, don't give trogs frostbrands is the lesson here. Thus concludes Full House 5th edition, my first Mekone playthrough in multiplayer. In terms of reflections, overall, again, a fairly successful game for me. Made it to the end of the game, which I think is more or less what I was aiming at. Not really expecting to win any of these. I think trying to win a game this massive is a pretty big undertaking, and I just don't quite have the experience yet. I'm certainly trying to win, but just not really expecting it. So making it to the end of it is really cool. It was looking like I was not going to make it to the end of it. So, a bit of a surprise turnaround. I got helped quite a bit by Arcocephali coming in. And I do think Calum coming in, controversial as it was, and in a lot of ways very unhelpful, may have triggered other people coming in against TNN. So that may have helped us out as well. It's hard to say. Certainly didn't help us out in terms of territory, or losses. But when people see another person's flag showing up in someone else's lands, that can sometimes induce them to come in. So yeah, I think if it had just been myself and TNN 1v1ing, probably would have lost that. It was not looking good. I don't really think that I had the strength to, even if I could have survived for another 10 or 20 turns, I don't think I could have ever realistically taken infrastructure off of TNN. I think probably where things derailed was definitely choosing to take the 2v1. I kind of justified it to myself in the sense that I hadn't gotten a response, so I didn't 100% know that it was that Ulm was going to attack me. But considering there was no response and he had an army on my border, I knew. I should have known, certainly. So still launching the attack against Hinnom when I knew that was coming was aggressive. And I mean, I don't even think that was necessarily the wrong move. It was somewhat motivated by Ulm's recruitment, which I felt was a little unusual, and that possibly they were a newer player, and they still may have been. It was, their movement during that war was still confusing to me, not really sure what was going on there. And then also, of course, I knew that, Hinnom's situation and the timing of the attack was probably going to work out for us pretty well. So I had a pretty high confidence that, things would go well for us against Hinnom. Whereas Ulm, had a much more substantial force built up. And so even if we were going to be able to beat it, it probably would have cost us more and taken longer, to actually get any gains out of that. I think probably where I went wrong was not committing to using my Pretender against one of Ulm's stacks. And I think that was like it was a coin toss, right? And that's not a great scenario. And I think, had I lost my Pretender, probably I would have lost the game right there. It's always hard to say, maybe I dump, a bunch of money into my PD and pull it out. And the Pretender, she probably would have done a lot of damage, even if she had died. So, maybe I wouldn't have lost right there. But I think my reluctance to use my Pretender against Ulm meant that while that was the safer play in the short term, it meant that at best that war was going to go really slowly. And then it also forced me to, keep a lot of polemarks and things like that, things that I was planning on using to raid a lot of the rest of Hinnom's land, back at home. And so as a result, I didn't actually get that much of Hinnom's territory, right? Some of it Kalem grabbed. I think Kailasa grabbed a little bit. TNN grabbed some. Pretty much anybody who bordered, which is normal. It's difficult to not lose any land in a war to Vulturing, but I lost a lot of it, at least probably more than half. So when you combine the fact that the war against Hinnom was successful but not super successful, and then my war with Ulm dragged, and ultimately we didn't really even fight it, right? Kind of got bailed out by Niflheim, which in some ways is good, right? Because I didn't really risk anything, and I did lose a little bit of territory, so that's money and gems lost, which is not ideal. But I also didn't lose, any mages or any troops really. I think I did lose a few polemarks, attempting to raid, and we bumped into an army. But I didn't lose too much. I didn't sustain the casualties that you might have in a major army v army fight. So in that sense, it was good. But I do think that it kind of opened the door for TNN. I still don't really know exactly what went down there. It sounds like, Kalem was encouraging TNN to come in, which I'm certainly inclined to believe, considering everything that happened. But I don't actually know what happened there. And I just think that, the fact that I had an Ulmish army sitting in my territory that I wasn't dealing with, it definitely made me a more attractive target for TNN versus, if I'd committed my Pretender, right, and smashed an Ulmish army, and maybe Ulm would have withdrawn at that point, maybe Niflheim would have jumped in sooner. You never know how these things are going to shake out. But yeah, I would say that's where things kind of probably started to go wrong, and that perhaps if I had played a little more aggressively, I would have been in a stronger position, and TNN wouldn't have chosen me as his next target to knife. But TNN did, and that overall in the end ended up going okay. It was definitely a terrible start to that war. The fact that I had been able to get a non-aggression pact with the elves, and then they canceled it. You should just assume that the elves are going to be attacking you. And I felt that okay, there's going to be a 50-50, right? It's maybe not, because it did sound like, there was other possible ways that they could go. So somewhat as a result of that, and then just somewhat due to inexperience in fighting the elves, I just didn't move any counter raiding groups out ahead of time, right? So I responded to the elfing after it already happened, and the response was adequate, at least, but it's better if you preempt that, right? So you don't lose almost every single one of your provinces, and you knock out some of those raiders right at the opening of the war. So it was a bad start to that war, definitely, but then I'd never actually been elfed, but I'd subbed into a position where I'd had to fight an elf nation. So I at least had some idea, of how to, counter raid successfully against the elves. And I think that part went decently well. I overplayed the the possibility of army wipes. I was really convinced that like Foul Vapors or Wrathful Skies were going to come out, and I'm not totally sure why they didn't. I still think those both would have been like pretty bad for me. So I don't even think that was necessarily an unwarranted worry. It just ended up never coming to pass. But, it did cause me to like rush in, right, with my army and, completely wiped out and ambushed. And so like that definitely was not the right move. I'm still not sure digging in was necessarily the right answer. Probably also I needed to think about army composition. One of the things is that TNN's Sacreds, he didn't have any poison resistance or shock resistance on his Bless. So it was actually going to be kind of difficult for him to use one of those army wipe spells with any of his own forces in place, right? So he would have had to try to use, maybe some summons, something like some swarm or something like that, to try to cover his casters, like while the wipe, did their thing. And that's a lot harder to pull off if you have something like, say, like those long dead horsemen, something that's very fast that's going to run in and kill those casters. And I didn't really have an element like that early on in my armies, and that's probably something that I need to think about a little bit more, rather than like getting like so paralyzed by the idea of wipes. It's just like, okay, especially in a situation where, like I said, the Sacreds don't have the Bless. It's a little different if the enemy army can kind of fight through the wipe, while you can't. So that's significantly worse, but that's not really the situation I was in. So it's like, yeah, I needed to worry about wipes, but probably could have just adjusted my army composition a little bit, or like summoned in a few air elementals or something, like right at the start of my script, to make sure that that's going to be less of a problem. And then just didn't really respect, the elves' defense. I was thinking like, yeah, the Gigantes like should trade decently effectively, and we should be able to drive their defense down. But just didn't really have the numbers to like actually drive down the elves' defense enough to the point where we could even hit them. So in the army engagement that happened, like just got completely wiped out. Otherwise, like I said, did a decent job against the raiding. Got to see a lot of different things. Obviously, him dropping in like that air elemental kill squad, forced me to readjust. So we kind of had a period in the middle there where things were looking a little more dire, but at that point I wasn't too worried about like the rating aspect of it. I knew that once I readjusted my counter raiding groups, we could counter raid successfully. And that's about the time that Calum jumped in to help us. Again, I think probably they were looking at it like, okay, Mekone's done now, because I think we probably looked like we were done. And I was certainly hurting at that point, but we had a lot of mages and decent amount of troops left as well, which Calum found out the hard way, as we fought each other ostensibly as allies, and that did no favors for either of us, and it was just sort of an unfortunate situation all around. But then with Arcoscephali coming in and actually helping, that's pretty much what bailed me out against TNN, because like I said, I don't think there was really any way that I was going to win that war and actually take TNN's capital and everything. I'm a little hesitant to say, like, I do think that, in the long run, TNN, it took at least some death scales, right? So they were kind of winding down in some senses, right? The longer things dragged on, kind of the weaker they were going to get. It is a fairly gradual effect. I think the fact that they were getting hit by like Atlantis, myself, like Arcoscephali, like that's a much bigger aspect of it. But like I do think that like, focusing on the cap sacreds, right, and dumping your scales enough that you're like down to death scales, like it is kind of rough in the long term, and possibly contributed to like why things started to turn around. And then after that, I think there was never really any realistic hope that we were going to win after that fight with TNN. And I think the diplomatic situation being what it was, and also our border being what it was with Calum, like I do actually think that was the right war. I didn't really realize it at the time, but I also think that Mekone stacks up pretty well against Calum, just from like a troop standpoint. The birds kind of struggle against like heavy armor, right? So it's like, well, we're a bunch of giants, we have a lot of hit points, and we have heavy armor, and we have no problem killing the birds. So, from troop engagements, like even our human hoplites, I think exchange like pretty well against like Kalem's base troops. Obviously, by the time we actually started fighting, I was like turn 70 or something. So a ton of magic is out, right? So like troop v troop, matchups kind of matter a lot less versus like, I think Kalem would probably be a decent rush target for Mekone, I would say, right? It's like if you spawn next to a Kalem, it's like, yeah, go for him real early, and that'll probably work out, I think, unless there's something I've missed, which completely possible. But yeah, anyway, the war against Kalem, I think, went really well. Not without problems, absolutely, but the fact that we just fought like a really brutal raiding war, against the elves meant that, well, like, Kalem trying to raid us, like, I was much more prepared for that, and I think that is a situation, where I did sprinkle a bunch of answers out into my lands ahead of times, right, and like really saw the result of that. It was actually pretty rare that Kalem, ever got a flag like into our territory. There is definitely a balance to be struck in terms of, how much you use to defend your territory, because obviously that's, resources that you can't use to attack with. And I think probably at times, I was patrolling too much, like losing too much research. Research was not great for us this game. Like, yeah, we didn't hit any 9s. So my research was even worse than in my Ulm playthrough. And my research was not fantastic in my Ulm playthrough. There's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, we were fighting a lot. The war against TNN, kind of brought us to the brink. So we lost out a ton of research there. There are times that we weren't recruiting mages. We didn't have a ton of infrastructure. I was pretty late with a lot of infrastructure. So yeah, the research side of things didn't really go so hot. Even considering that, like, we had enough research to compete, I still feel that, like, this was enough, to do most of what we needed. So again, maybe a demonstration that, the best research isn't the end all be all, right? You just need to, hit the research targets that you're really, really going to need at the right times. I'm not here to tell you that research isn't important, but, if you don't get a bunch of 9s, like, that's okay. Like, you can definitely still win games. At least that's my feeling of it so far, having not won any games. So, grain of salt. But anyway, yeah, so, the war against Kalem was going pretty well, perhaps a bit on the slow side. I was kind of being cautious. I think Kalem was probably a little weaker than I realized. It can be kind of hard, to keep track of the birds and, like, where all their armies may or may not be. So, yeah, I definitely thought that, he had more troops and more mages than he at least showed. He did lose, a decent number of mages and such, trying to raid, but not a crippling. It didn't, it seemed like he ought to have had more. Yeah, I don't think he actually had like a ton of infrastructure either. So, I don't, maybe he wasn't building enough forts as well. It's hard to say, but like definitely, when I saw what was in like his capital, like in his last fort, or his other fort here, not his last fort, but kind of one of his other like important forts that he'd had for the majority of the game. I was kind of surprised at, how little was in there. He had been fighting Russ, right? Obviously, he's in a 2v1. So his forces were somewhat split. And, we'd seen some pretty substantial losses against Russ. And, there was definitely fights that I missed. Like, they were fighting before I even had my scouts in the area. So, a 2v1 always helps a lot, but, I think we did really well in the, anti-raiding war. Not quite as well in, like, our raiding. Like I said, I think, the Peltast wave or the Peltast chain needed to have happened, like, sooner, right? So, like, the Peltast groups that had at the start of the war, they did decently well, but then they got wiped out, which I was kind of expecting. And I think I did a good job of then wiping out his raiders, right? Basically baiting out his anti-raiders with my Peltasts, who I knew were going to get wiped out, but it was okay for them to get wiped out. And then, using our magic phase movement, right, with the Cyclopses for the most part, cloud trapezing in and then, wiping out his counter-raiding groups. Like, that part of it, went really well. And yeah, definitely plan on, doing more of that in the future for any nations that, have access to that. But then I had no more like Peltast raiding groups, to take more territory, like to bait out more raiders. So yeah, that was definitely an oversight, and something, if I ever play Mekone again, definitely correct. And then we didn't really get to see like any proper army fights, which is a little sad. So kind of hard to say like how the armies would have actually performed like against a fully scripted, fully gathered bird army. But yeah, I had a lot of fun playing Mekone. I probably will play them again at some point. They did feel stronger than early age Ulm, I think. They just have like higher path, mages. I mean, okay, this guy's got some earth boots on, but not seeing a ton of Earth Force in early age Ulm, and that, Earth is kind of their thing. We got plenty more fire. Having access to like the air too for the Cloud Trapeze is really huge. And then of course, the Polemarchs are just like really strong thugs. The Gigantes are like really strong units. And then, the Cyclopses are kind of like, low tier super combatants. I know a lot of people say like to not really use them in that role, right? They're not, they're not really good for it. And, they have a lot of problems, right? Like their morale's not great. Like their skills really suck. So they really do need like a brand or something like that. And again, I think Kalem's units really do kind of struggle, to wipe out like kind of super combatants. Because, if you get them with high protection and a lot of hit points, the birds, they don't have great attack density and they don't have great strength. So this is perhaps like a, best case scenario for the Cyclopses. But like, I don't know, like, are they the best super combatants? Like, no. Are they serviceable? Like, I would say yes, based on this experience. So yeah, I don't know, we'll see. I may live to regret that. Like this, may have been bad training. But at least for this game, they did exactly what I needed them to do, and yeah, it was really fun to use them that way. And let's just take a quick look at graphs here to close it out. So yeah, here are the graphs that we had all the way until the end. We can see that in terms of gem income, we actually, made it here into third, it looks like. A distant third, but still very cool. A lot of this, we picked up right at the tail end, as Kalem stopped playing. So, but we were still, right there, like probably, given a few more turns. I think this is roughly like where we would have ended up. So, not a bad finish overall. Research, on the other hand, not so hot. We were like fifth? Nope, we were actually just barely sixth, and probably not sixth, right? Because area under the curve. So like Niflheim probably had like more research than us overall, even though our rate of research, overtook his like right at the tail end. And like, yeah, that's the other thing, I kind of forgot to mention in the review. It really a shame that like the Gartha players sort of disappeared. They did kind of mess with the game state. The Atlantis player actually sort of mentioned, they're just like, yeah, like I'm already exhausted just fighting like AI Gartha. I was just thinking like, I mean, for anybody who's played single player, it's actually a lot. At least for myself, I find it a lot more exhausting to play against the AI than it is to actually play against human players. Human players are much harder to play against, but they also don't have infinite resources. So if you destroy a human player's army, like it stays dead, at least for like, a couple turns. Maybe if they're really on it, maybe they'll be able to re-recruit it in 3 or 4 turns and, regather it really quickly if they're good and they have a lot of infrastructure. But with the AI and like just the level of cheating that it does, it's just like every turn you have to be destroying like army after army. So it's actually probably more exhausting, in my opinion, to fight against the AI. And unfortunately, Atlantis, was having to fight against a still relatively substantial, right? This is Agartha's research. You can see like they still, had enough mages. This is probably when the AI took over. It's like research now. We don't need to do so much of that. But anyway, yeah, the AI Agartha was like still like fairly substantial. You can see like where's their gem income? Yeah, here it is. So it does look like Atlantis was probably like driving them back. But yeah, so that was kind of an unfortunate event. But yeah, it's something that happens. But yeah, our research was pretty miserable. So I think even though we're like third in gem income, but the research gap probably would have been telling, at the late game. And then, yeah, let me see if I can find some of the other graphs. So yeah, this is going to be a little harder to see. Hopefully is still somewhat useful. This is somebody had, I think actually Atlantis had Eyes of God up for a little while, so these are a little out of date, right? You can see like here's his graph carries on right after it got overwrote, or maybe somebody dispelled it. So this is the army size graph. You can see like Therados, gets a ton of free spawn. I think they were fighting Abyssia at the time, so like nicely done if that was you, Abyssia. But yeah, I think this is like part of why like Atlantis was like, I don't know if I want to deal with this. We actually were outnumbered, at least at this point, by Kalem, although a lot of that was probably just kind of garbage like corpse constructs. And army size can be a bit deceptive because it's like a lot of times you can create forces that are basically going to beat an infinite amount of chaff. So it's like at a certain point, army size kind of stops mattering. But yeah, Therados did have like a pretty substantial lead here in terms of their ghost production. And then this is the income graph. Therados is an undead nation and pop kill nation, so they're not up there. Atlantis is the clear leader here. I think this is actually Arcocephali is doing better. I knew they were doing well, but I actually would have expected Ermor to perhaps be the top land power. But yeah, Arco must have had like nice scales. And then we have like Ermor here, and then Kalem, and then myself here as a Mekone. So that is one place where like Mekone does struggle. It's one of their known weaknesses, right? They have unrest problems on top of their forts, and like it just causes them to kind of have less income than normal all game long. And it is a struggle, because a lot of their stuff is being giants decently expensive. So you do always like kind of feel the gold struggle as Mekone, and I think this does kind of highlight it. So yeah, I think that covers graphs and kind of covers my overall review, like thoughts on the game. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully it's been enjoyable. I'll have some more Dominions games here in the future, and hopefully we'll be doing better.